Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Invaluable Grace. And this week we are talking about surrender, right? A friend of mine who we both just really, really love the Word of God. We love the Bible, and we're always just trying to understand God's mind, just peer into His big, vast, massive mind. Our weekly Bible sessions really just allows us to do that. And the word surrender came up. Again, remember, all these words we hear all the time. We grew up hearing them, we grew up singing them, and worship songs, they're just heard synonymously with Christianity, and it's words like surrender and, the other words that I covered, the patience and the endurance and all of these words we just keep hearing, So again, we are on this journey to just uncover, and understand. I think it's so important to just really understand what we are saying, what we are singing, what we are reading, what we are hearing, what we are agreeing to as well, and I think I encourage everybody to just do that. It's so important. And it's so beautiful to come into understanding of something, in your own way, because I think God is always waiting to give us understanding. He wants to. He really, really does. But He's not going to give somebody understanding who doesn't want it or who is not even looking for it, because you're just going to misuse it, or abuse it, or it's going to confuse you. And you're going to waste that knowledge. So I really think pray for the desire if it's not there, and seek, because there's a plethora of treasures of information just waiting to be discovered. All right, so this week we are trying to figure out this word surrender, right? And I know a lot of people, myself included, have always thought, or we believe it has to do with relinquishing control, right? Which is not wrong, right? But I think we're gonna look at it a little bit deeper today, and we can just fully grasp the holistic term of surrender and why it's necessary. Why does surrender have to be a part of a Christian journey? Why do we need to surrender? Why is it such a prerequisite, of our faith, of our belief, of our walk with Jesus? Because really that's what He says. If you do not deny self, you cannot call yourself my disciple. And essentially that is what surrender looks like: denying self and relinquishing the ability to be your own boss, So we're going to look at Luke today, Luke 9, chapter 23, verse 24, and I want to read the Message version, because for me, that was the one that made me, I read it and I was like screaming, because he says what he says, Let's read Luke 9, 23 to 24 in the Message version. And it says, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You are not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering, embrace it. Follow me and I will show you how. Follow me and I will show you how. All right. I also want to read from the Passion Version, because it's also a very good translation. And it says, if you truly desire to be my disciple, you must disown your life completely, right? Embrace my cross as your own and surrender to my ways. For if you choose self-sacrifice, giving up your lives for my glory, you will discover true life. But if you choose to keep your lives for yourselves, you will lose what you try to keep. All right, so heavy stuff here, right? And maybe, yes, we've all kind of understood that, that is really Jesus. What Jesus is saying is that, that give up your thinking, give up your control and surrender to Him. But we need to understand why we need to surrender. And that is really the question that I'm asking here. Why that? Why is that the thing we need to do before we can access, a good life, before we can walk a disciple's journey, before we can live a righteous life? Why does surrender need to happen? And of course I was led down a rabbit hole, and I wanted to understand the term surrender. So in surrender, in its original text, there's many different definitions to it, but I wrote them all down just so we can understand the word and the motive behind the word, or the response to the word, right? So all of these different definitions were like to give into, right? So when you surrender, you're giving into the hands of somebody else, right? You give over, you deliver, you commit, right? You permit, or you present. right? So all of these words are already telling us that it's something that you give willingly. It's not taken from you, right? Somebody doesn't steal it from you. Somebody doesn't bribe you into giving it to them. You are fully conscious and fully aware that this is something you are giving over to somebody. You allowing somebody to have it, to, take charge of it, right? To govern over it. It is a willing acknowledgement, right? So no coercion, no force, no bribery, no nothing. You are fully conscious of what you are doing, right? And now let's talk about surrender in the world, right? And how we've grown up thinking about it. Because it's very interesting how the same word is completely opposite in two different realms. And by realms, I mean the spirit realm, where God resides, and the worldly realm where we reside, right? So in godly realm, we're talking surrender as in giving over, presenting, because remember, this is now the original text, giving God, letting God take the driver's seat, essentially, like Luke said in the Passion Version. But in worldly surrender, we hear that word and we fight it. Why? Because when you think of surrender in the world, you think you are weak. You think you are giving somebody power over you. It's it's almost emasculating, for lack of a better word, because think of war. When you go to war, when people surrender in a war, it means they've lost, right? It means that you are the loser. If you are surrendering and you're raising your white flag, it means that you can see that you're not going to lose. You're not going to win this fight, so I might as well surrender for peace sake. When we think of surrender in a personal capacity, when people tell you that don't give up, don't surrender, keep working, keep grafting, keep going, don't surrender, don't lose hope. That's what we think, because we think if we surrender, we are giving up, right? So that word, funny enough, in a worldly connotation is a negative word. And I think subconsciously, that's why we repel it so much when we hear it in a spiritual reference, because we have this perception that it means weakness, it means failure, it means loss, right? It means you are less of, right? But God, on the other hand, here is saying, let me read it again, right? He's saying here, if you truly desire to be my disciple, right? So if is almost like a question. He's giving you an option here. He's not saying you must do this is going to happen. He's saying if you want to, right? He's already raising a statement that begs to say that there are people that the desire is there, right? People do want to, but wanting and actually doing are two different things. And this is like the prerequisite of those with that desire. And he's saying you need to disown your life completely, right? Not halfway, not partially, completely, right? And embrace my cross as your own and surrender to my ways. Because he's saying here, if you do this, you will discover true life, right? Not the watered down, heavy laden life that we think we get if we keep fighting and if we keep grafting and if we keep doing things in our own capabilities. No, God is saying if you do things his way, right, by completely giving everything to him, you will access true life, right? And now this brings me to my next talking point. If this is the formula to a good life, or as best as it can be anyway in a broken world, right? Surrender, this word, relinquishing, basically prostrating yourself before a perfect and a good God. Why is it something that we're running away from, number one? And why is it something that the world is telling you not to do? If this is the formula for a good life, we should be running towards it, not away from it, right? So let's backtrack a bit quickly. Let's go back to the garden, because this is really where everything began. This is where it all started and it all ended, essentially, right? Is the first choice, right? The first choice was put into play, and the first lesson of surrender was exhibited in this particular scenario, right? So God, of course, gave Adam and Eve everything but one thing. Gave them everything but one thing, right? And cue in Satan, the deceiver, right? He comes, and what does he do? He gives them an alternative to what God said, right? So God said you can eat of everything except this fruit, because if you do this, you shall surely die. He's saying if, so he's also again raising a question, right? Because this question is always linked to a choice. Do not eat this fruit, or if you eat this fruit, you will surely die. Okay, so God has given the standard, right? Then cue in Satan, and Satan comes with the opposite of what God says by saying he surely did not say that, right? I think he actually meant that if you eat it, you will be like him. Okay, so Satan is now giving them an alternative option. Remember, choices to make a choice, you need to be presented with two things, with two options, right? So God gave the one, there wasn't another option to begin with. So naturally, if Satan didn't deceive them, they would have gone with God's directive because there was nothing else trying to steer them away from that particular choice, right? But the deceiver had to now bring an option, right? Which was completely contrary to what God said. And that was now a battle for surrender. Because now you're faced with the choice. Do I do things God's way, or do I do things my way? God's way or my way, right? And obviously we all know how that story ended, because they ended up doing things their way. It wasn't the enemy who made them do it. The enemy just presented a choice, an option, right? They chose willingly to not go with God's option, right? And as a result, the world broke. Disobedience came into the play. And my understanding with this scenario is that by listening to God, they would have surrendered to him. By obeying God, they would have surrendered to his way and his will, right? But because they didn't surrender to God, they chose their own will. And that result brought along curses and broken families and discord, and just a broken world, essentially. And for me, that was just like, that is what surrender is. It is not just saying, I give my life to you, Jesus. No. Surrender is knowing that you are faced with differing options every single day. It's God's choices or God's options or the enemy's options. Those are the two choices we are always presented with on a daily basis. It's either God's way or the enemy's way, right? And because of sin, our spirit is predisposed to follow the enemy's way, right? Our spirit is predisposed to not want to surrender because we think by doing it this way, it's better, but it's deceiving. It's deceptive. It's put up in a way that it's veiled, that it looks enticing, but it's not, because that way will always lead to death, right? But what we have now is this constant struggle of listening to what God's option is and surrendering to that and doing our own thing because we are listening to what the enemy is saying and surrendering to that. So either way, we're surrendering to one option or choice here, right? And by surrendering, you are relinquishing your control, you are submitting to that thing, you are agreeing to it, and you are living in accordance to that thing. And that is really the true meaning of surrender. And that's why it's a daily thing. That's why Jesus said you have to do it daily. It's not a once-off thing. You don't just surrender once, because we are faced with choices every day, every second. We are faced with choices. And do you know how you are always battling the choice between God and the enemy? It's because whenever God speaks to you, you don't like it. Whenever God cautions you, you don't like it, right? It's uncomfortable. It doesn't sit well. It's not favorable. Always. And that's why you should refrain from responding quickly. That is why waiting is a prerequisite in the Christian journey, because when you respond quickly, you are responding to the alternative, because that is more enticing. God's options are never naturally what we want. Never. That's why you have to wait and be led by the Spirit, because if you did it in your own thinking and capacity, you would always choose the wrong option. Ultimately, you are choosing death every time, because God's option always leads to life. Think of Jesus, right? And what's so beautiful about Jesus is that he is really the physical manifestation of our lives. He really came here to show us what that looked like, right? So we were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he understands what's about to happen. He's sweating blood, he's crying, and he asks God, if there's another option, please show it to me, because this is too heavy. If I had a choice, I would choose a different choice. That's what he's telling God. Jesus is telling God, can we choose another way to do this? Because this one is too heavy. And what does God say to him? This is the way. You will be fine. I've got you. I've got you. He may not have answered him in the garden, but he strengthened his will and his resolve. Because immediately after that prayer, Jesus understood and assumed responsibility and knew what he had to do. Right? But God's option is never favorable to us. Never. Because we are always given an alternative. Always. And surrender is agreeing with God's option. Because if you're not surrendering to God, you're surrendering to an alternative. And ultimately, the alternative is always the enemy. And our lives are a result of that alternative. Okay, so I really just wanted to share this with you because I think it's such an important understanding of what surrender looks like. It goes beyond just saying, yes, God, have your way. But yes, God, and every single choice thereafter is a yes, God, is a yes, God, is a yes, God. Especially when you don't like it. It has to be a yes. Because he's telling you, my options will always give you a great life. Always. You may not see it then, right? But know that. Know that. All right. So I just wanted to share this with you because I really thought that it's a really important understanding and clarity on what surrender really, really looks like, and to just check ourselves when we're always presented with options daily. You know, which are you deferring to? And don't be so quick to make the choice, especially when it sounds like something you want to do, because in most cases that isn't the God option. That's the alternative option. God options are never enticing, not at face value anyway, right? But they are better. And this is where faith comes in. All right, so I hope this message blessed you today, and we'll check you on the next video. Bye, guys.